Fathers always get the short end of this stick, so we're used to it. It's been that way from the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. Even our Father caught short shrift on this one. Every law that he gave away, every one he put out there was ignored. Every book that was written, they wrote another one and said, oh, this is the one we want to follow. So you wonder, well, why doesn't anyone do Father's Day sermons? When you really think about it, they're all Father's Day sermons. So there's no real need to get into anything special about it, because almost anything that you deal with in the modern world, the Father had something to do with it. But the one that is just becoming very bothersome, and I mentioned it last week, it was kind of in passing, but with all of the data that was pulled up and all of that, I felt like there was more that needed to be dealt with here, because you listen to people talk about it, and it's obvious that they're going on very old information, and a lot of the information, when it gets old, it has a tendency to have what they call half-life. In other words, by the time you get to it and understand it, by the time it gets repeated, it's only half true. That's what I call half-life. In other words, it's kind of dead anyway, and it doesn't really make any sense. You wind up not understanding it in the sense that it's necessary. The topic of suicide has suddenly become a very hot topic in this world in the last few weeks, especially after a couple of celebrities decided to take this path, which to me is more proof of the sickness of this country and the world as we creep closer and closer to these end times. We fret and strut and worry about one or two celebrities, but maybe you didn't know this. There are roughly 22 suicides a day among our military veterans. Every day. On the average, deal with this. And you have to understand this. There's something going on here. On the average, you have one person committing suicide every 16.2 minutes. They don't have any stats on why, because most people don't like to talk about it, because in its honesty, it is a problem, a real problem. We have to stop in this country seeing celebrities as some kind of royalty, and nothing is important until it happens to them. I'm not saying they're not important, but don't put them above yourselves. Don't put them above your family. Don't put them above your fellow believers. Don't do that. They're not some special class, as they've been given that in this country. Athletes are just, wow, oh my goodness. Did you hear about so-and-so? It's all you hear about at the water cooler. Can't even get water. Can I get some water, please? It's all you hear. It's just another way that we're divided. It's like I talked about. As long as we're divided, we're never going to be able to come together. As long as you don't come together, you're never going to be able to deal in honesty about what's really going on out here. And as long as we don't know what's going on out here, we have no idea what that is going on out here is costing us all. And especially those who decide, I can't take it anymore. What's it costing to them in terms of self-worth as opposed to self-esteem? Worth is intrinsic. What do you think you're worth? How do you view you? Very important. And when everybody is more important than you, and you're already having some problems, who knows what you might decide. For those who have never been through that, it doesn't make any sense to you. To those who have, it makes all the sense in the world. Oh, we want to beat up on people about taking a knee on the football field when the owners haven't spent nearly enough money to find out what they can do to end the CTE fatalities on that same football field. CTE is that disease where they can't even tell what it is until the person dies, and they can cut the brain open and take a look at it and figure out what happened and what it was. They know that it happens from butting heads on the football field, which I don't understand. If you've got a $3,000 designed helmet on your head that's supposed to stop that, why is it that all of a sudden now you're having more brain problems than they had with the leather cap they used to wear back in the 30s and the 40s? Doesn't make sense. But what are they doing about it? Very little. I think they put up something like, what was it, $70 million that was supposed to cover all the cases going back in time. And there are new ones every day that's not covering it. That's like somebody coming to you and say, we've got CTE. They give them a give them a pack of gum in terms of what it was worth in total. They need to deal with that. Don't worry about the knee. The knee is covered. It's called the First Amendment, folks. Get with it. Understand it. But you see, that's not the only problem. Some of those players, a couple of them we know. Dave Duerson used to play for the Bears. Came home one day, blew his brains out. And there have been several others. That one we knew personally. But you see, also, along with the problems on the football field, maybe we should become more concerned about our veterans. Something's wrong if they're killing each other at 22 a day. Instead of spending all that money on more bombs, more killer airplanes, more ways to kill people, laser guns and so forth. Now we want Star Wars for real, huh? Why not peace? But maybe a little bit closer to home, why not take some of that money from the arms makers and put it toward better care of our veterans after they get back here?
That's right.
And how about ending some of that hawkish behavior in Washington, D.C., especially those decision makers on the Hill who also are draft dodgers, who for whatever reason, when their number came up, they went and hid behind mommy and daddy and says, find some reason why we can't go. And they came up with some really lame ones. I've got flat feet, or I've got to go to college, or something else. Most of those on the Hill that are sending your sons and daughters off to war have never fought themselves. Fascinating that you can make those decisions. Those decisions are made a little bit differently when you've been out there in the trenches. Whole different set of mind. When you listen to these guys talk that have been out there, I'm not talking about the ones that have been shot down and political stuff got them back. I'm talking about the ones that got shot down and maybe just barely got back. If they got back at all. It's time to become more aware of what you're dealing with after they come back, because when they come back, you hear about all kinds of internal problems. You hear about them, and we won't even get into the ones that came back after being promised, oh, you can have your GI Bill, you'll be able to go to school, you'll be able to do this, you'll be able to do that, and then you get back, and if you don't have an address, you can't get any of that, and then you find some of those guys out on the streets homeless after serving your country. They don't say how many of those are the ones that decide, I can't take it anymore. But you can be sure some of them are. You can be sure of it. It's time for all of us in this country to learn to care more about everyone else in this country and stop worrying about who it is. Because let's be honest, until everybody's happy, it will never be, if it ever was, great. But we better get to the business of doing that before the tribulation begins, because once it begins, no one's going to care about anyone except for themselves. But I digress, but ever so slightly. But getting back to the question at hand, what does the Bible truly say about suicide? Even though it's not specifically mentioned as a sin in Scripture, at least not the way that the skeptics like it.
I wanted to say right there, if you kill yourself, we're going to kill you.
You all aren't familiar with this book, are you? That's not how he does things. That's not how the Father does things. He's not going to make it so plain that you can figure it out in one reading and say, oh, this is easy, because when it's that easy, you forget about it. You don't think about it anymore. You don't go back to it and look at it and say, well, maybe I didn't have that quite right. Let me go back and look at that again. And notice when you go back and continue to look at this book over and over and over again, every time you go back and look at it, no matter how you might have started looking at it back in the days of the horseless carriage. And all of a sudden now that you have flying cars, it makes the same sense to you. And you see that these things in a different way, but you see the same thing. It's just the way it is. But you see, there's more than enough information here to provide the answer that we're looking for. The law of Elohim is complex, just like any other body of law. Look at your own, for instance. Thousands and thousands of laws, and they're sitting up there writing more and more every day. Yet you got more crime than anything. And no one, well, we don't know how to deal with that. Enforce the laws you wrote. Oh, we can't do that because some people are above the law. Oh, really? They are? Yeah, they are. So-and-so has killed a bunch of people and they're still walking around. These folks have poisoned your water and they're still walking around. Ask anybody in Flint, Michigan, has anybody been put in jail up there yet? No. All that water that was down there in New Orleans a few years back, has anybody really said anything about what happened there? No. September 11th, oh, that was Osama bin Laden. Oh, shut up, Ray. Anyway, there's so much that, the laws are very unbalanced here. But this one is very balanced. A little bit too balanced. Maybe that's why everybody decided, well, maybe we better have another holy book other than this one to kind of put things the way we want to put it, so that if we want to let some people get away with some stuff, we can do that. No, it doesn't work like that. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. As I said, the law of Elohim is complex, just like any body of laws. Sometimes it may not appear to cover or specify a particular action as sin, although there may be similar judgments which can be used to narrow down a clear answer for a particular action. But we must understand that suicide sometimes is not the most black and white of paths that one would choose to tread. There are reasons for it. There may be a multitude of reasons for someone to consider ending his or her own life. Depression, mental disorder, disorder in your household, substance abuse, persecution, torture. Oh no, that doesn't happen in this country. Oh no. Would have loved to have heard something from those young ladies that are disappearing on the west side before a couple of them died as to what happened there. The purpose of this little study, I guess we could call it, is not so much to judge any person, but to look at the judgments that Elohim has laid out in his word against such an act. It's far more complicated than most surface believers will ever own up to. With that being said, let's go to the scriptures. You see, in the scriptures, we see a few individuals mentioned as having taken their own lives. Some in some inventive and rather roundabout ways, but the result was the same. Let's drop anchor. Judges, the 9th chapter, the 53rd verse. Judges, the 9th chapter, the 53rd verse. Where it says, and a certain woman cast a piece of a millstone upon Abimelech's head. In other words, she popped him in the head with a rather large rock. And all to break his skull. Then he called hastily unto the young man his armor bearer and said unto him, draw your sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew me. and his young man thrust him through, and he died. Although Abimelech was probably going to die from that head wound, he hastened his death, thereby ordering his armor bearer to kill him rather than to be embarrassed by admitting that a woman killed him. Oh, male supremacy, misogyny, how foolish thou art. Not technically we could call this, I wouldn't call this a suicide because it was assisted. If you're going to nail him to the wall for it, what do you do for his armor bearer? For him, that's murder. Although he was told to do it, how do you put that in legal terms? If you think that I'm being stupid to question the decision, anybody remember Mr. Kevorkian? Who people paid him to come in and give them chemicals to kill them because they didn't want to just blow their brains out or other things. This is a very complicated issue. We just don't like to see it. Now, the Father doesn't see it as complicated. He's very sure about what he's going to do. But we're going to consider some things before we get to that. Let's go to Judges, the 16th chapter, the 28th verse. Judges, the 16th chapter, the 28th verse. This story we've heard before. And Samson called unto Yahweh and said unto Yahweh, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, Yahweh, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. If you remember, they did several things to him in the process of torturing him, and one of them was to poke his eyes out while he was standing there watching them. And they finally decided they're going to be funny and they're going to bring him out and make fun of him. So he asked them to do something, and they didn't understand why, but he asked them to tie them between the main 2 pillars of the building that they were partying in, just to make sure we understand the situation. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up. If you saw how pillars were set up back in those days, all of the weight of the whole house was on those. If those things were to come down, anybody in the house is, how they say, brought the house down? Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what he did here. Samson took hold of the 2 pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was held up or borne up. Of the one with the left on the right hand, on the other with his left hand. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might And the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead whom he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. You see, Samson avenged himself, but also sacrificed himself to destroy the Philistines with his last breath. This is not exactly a suicide, but that is not exactly our call either, is it? 1 Samuel, the 31st chapter, the 3rd verse. First Samuel, the 31st chapter, the 3rd verse. This is where Saul finally decided he was going to do what he was told to do, but did it a little bit too late. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him. And he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor bearer, Draw your sword and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. Maybe we don't know. Well, see, it's not that we don't know about it. A lot of what goes on in war in this country, we don't like to talk about, because we just like to talk about winning. But some of that winning involves decapitation. As we saw in Abu Ghraib, it also means sometimes doing awful things to people or forcing them to do awful things to themselves or others. And this is what Samuel was afraid of. One of the things that they used to do back then was to chop a man up after killing him, parade the parts around, laugh at them. It was more, and they tried to make it sound like it was just the Arabs, but it wasn't just the Arabs that would rape the dead body, which I find ridiculous. And most people didn't even know that that happened among men in this country until they started having more and more wars with people in other areas of the country where these things were more common. But you come to find out that it was going on here too. Why do you think it caught on so heavily in the jails? Where they didn't just wake up one morning, wow, he's cute. No. It was always there. It's more of a thing of domination than sexual gratification. You got to understand that. Oh, wow, he's there. No. The earlier they learn it, the more they decide, hey, this is not something I want to become involved in. It is what it is. But his armor bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. Saul here commits suicide out of fear of being tortured. Verse 5, and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. In other words, he said, hey, they're going to say I did this. I'm going to. Oh, this is a bloody book. Oh, he talk about his war. That's all we do is fight. This country has been in some kind of war almost every year of its existence, all the way from the 1776 war for our quote-unquote independence and freedom, all the way up to the wars that are going on right now. Afghanistan, Syria. Oh yeah, there's a war going on in Syria, and yes, we are involved in it. There's been something going on since 1776, almost continually to now. There's something wrong with that. There's just something wrong with that. 2 Samuel, the 17th chapter, the 23rd verse. 2 Samuel, the 17th chapter, the 23rd verse, which says, "And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and arose and got him home to his house, to his city, and put his household in order, and hanged himself and died, and was buried in the sepulchre of his father." Who he here had conspired against King David and counseled Absalom. So now he finally commits suicide in despair for being cast aside, thrown away, basically. He thought he was going to become somebody important, but all of a sudden, when he decided to help Absalom, oh, that was a mistake. 1 Kings, the 16th chapter, the 18th verse. First Kings, the 16th chapter, the 18th verse. "And it came to pass when Zimri saw that the city was taken, that he went into the palace of the king's house and burnt the king's house over him with fire and died." Zimri here commits suicide for fear of capture after he murdered King Eli and his family. It's amazing. It's almost like what you hear so many times with people now, where they'll go out and kill a bunch of people. Then when the police corner them, rather than just throw their hands up and be caught, they just kill themselves. Same thing. And then we get to the more well-known incidents. Matthew, the 27th chapter, the 3rd verse. Matthew, the 27th chapter, the 3rd verse. "Then Judas, who had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed this innocent blood. And they said, what's that to us? See to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. Judas was so filled with guilt over his betrayal of Yeshua that he went out, bought a field with the money after they gave it back. He tried to give it back, and they just threw it on the temple floor and says, hey, you did it now. It's on you. See to it. So he took the 30 pieces of silver, if you know the story, and went out and bought a field. Akeldama was the name, and hung himself on his own property. While nothing really negative is mentioned about any of the above, other than that Judas Iscariot did what he did, there's no specific mention of suicide as a sin in and of itself. In the case of Saul, the lying spirit impersonating Samuel prophesies to him from the grave in 1 Samuel, the 28th chapter, the 19th verse. This spirit claiming to be Samuel prophesies to him, and as I said, and promises him, says, tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. Meaning that they will join Samuel in death, or at least what they thought was Samuel. This shows that, and a lot of people don't use this the way they should, because what this scripture proves is that at our natural death or suicide, whichever it is, all people naturally go straight to the grave. And that is what's to come afterward. But it comes afterward. but not immediately, as many ministers claim, against the truth. When this truth is plainly set forth in the word of Elohim. Nobody dies and immediately goes off to whatever reward. You die. And when the call or the trumpet goes out, according to whichever resurrection you've earned, the first to those who got it right and lived it right, or the second those who never got a chance but will now get one. This is the part that nobody wants to deal with. Oh, once you did, that's it. No. But when you say no, you're blaspheming. Aren't you dead? You're dead. Yeah, the first death. Why does it talk about a second death? It means that you can die again. If you blow it again. And some will. But it's not our place to say who those will be, who those will be, because we really don't know that. It's not our call. It's the Father's call. It's not ours. But no one goes immediately, as many ministers claim, to their death or to their reward. Elohim in his word is very clear on the fact that taking a life, however, is a punishable offense. No one can argue with that. And you see, as per his judgment, the murderer deserves death, as long as it was not an accidental death. This is where the call gets interesting and fully displays the amazing wisdom of Elohim. Leviticus, the 24th chapter, the 17th verse, which is very clear. Leviticus, the 24th chapter, the 17th verse, where it says, whoever takes a human life shall surely be put to death. Need more? Exodus, the 21st chapter, the 12th verse. Exodus, the 21st chapter, the 12th verse, where it says, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. I think that's pretty plain. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but Yahweh let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which you may flee, what they used to call the sanctuaries. Well, not sanctuary cities, that's what they call it now for something else, but the cities of refuge. In other words, you could run, and from there, you could make a case to say, hey, this is what really happened here. And then the judges go there and make a determination based on the facts of the case and determine whether or not you set out to kill this person or whether it was just something that happened accidentally through something else or some other misadventure. But in any case, you're being dealt with fairly, not just so-and-so said it happened, so we're going to kill him. Or like they used to hear it all the ways out there in the old West. Somebody bring me a rope. That didn't happen back then. That's what these cities of refuge were all about. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, then he may die. Because what they used to do when they would go to the cities of refuge, they would go to the temple or to the sanctuary and they would hang on to the altar. That's where you get that whole thing now where we had a case where we were at a church and there was a young man that was hiding up in the church and they used to call it sanctuary, where he was hiding away from the Mexican government. And I don't want to say too much because I don't know how that ended officially, but this is the same thing. He would hang on to the actual altar, and if it was determined that you were innocent, they would let you go. But if they found out that you were guilty, they'd slay you right there at the altar. Numbers, the 35th chapter, the 31st verse. Moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be put to death. Sometimes what people would do, like they do now, they know someone's guilty and they'll pay the family so much to let them go. They do it straight to the government now, and then the judge will turn around and let them go, and then nobody's happy then. But this isn't what went on here. You could basically buy your way out of certain things. I look at it, and just a question, I just wonder about it. If sometimes they let you go within this little system, which I'm wondering how much God had anything to do with. I wonder if you got away from man, but closed your eyes in your death. Sir, we got a little problem here. And there's nobody there to pay you off now. Now you got to deal with this thing. So let's not get to the idea that man is the final word on any of these decisions, because he's not. You see, suicide is essentially the distinct extinguishing of your own life. And we see proof to that extent that we don't own our own lives. You got to understand, we don't own our own lives. Once you go into the water and come up and hands are laid on you and the Holy Spirit is given unto you, your life is purchased. You don't own you anymore. You don't own you anymore. Yeshua has paid a price for each of our lives. Then, at that point, you understand that we are a gift from Elohim. What does it say? Where do you hear that? Where do you see that? Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, 4th verse. Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, the 4th verse, where it says, "Behold, all souls are mine. The soul of the Father, as well as the soul of the Son, is mine." And he punctuates that with a little something that should answer our question to some degree. The soul who sins shall die. Oh, wait a minute. You need more? Okay. 1 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, 17th verse. First Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, 17th verse. It says, if anyone destroys Elohim's temple, Elohim will destroy him. Yeah. For Elohim's temple is holy, and you are that temple. Yeah. Clear enough, I thought. But just in case you needed more, let's go down to 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, 19th verse. And no, we're not playing case law. If you notice, all of this is in context. 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, the 19th verse, where it says, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from Elohim? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify Elohim in your body. In other words, do the things that glorify him, not the things that make him shame. Because after all, you belong to him. You see, being purchased by Yeshua is a mirror of the Exodus event where, as Yahweh, he saved the firstborn of the children of Israel, therefore making Elohim the purchaser and owner of their lives. Numbers, the 3rd chapter, the 13th verse. Notice how much this sounds like what he was saying in 1 Corinthians. Numbers, the 3rd chapter, the 13th verse. For all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated for my own all the firstborn in Israel, both of man and of beast. They shall be mine. I am Yahweh. Leviticus, the 25th chapter, the 42nd verse. Leviticus, the 25th chapter, the 42nd verse, where it says, for they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. Go further. Numbers, the 18th chapter, the 15th verse. Numbers, the 18th chapter, the 15th verse, where it says, everything that opens the womb of all flesh, whether man or beast, which they offer to Yahweh, shall be yours. Nevertheless, the firstborn of man you shall redeem, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. And their redemption price, at a month old you shall redeem them. You shall fix at 5 shekels in silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. There were several shekel weights, and the one he was determined was the one that was the weight of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs. And that from that you could buy a beast. Isaiah, the 43rd chapter, the 1st verse. Isaiah, the 43rd chapter, the 1st verse, where it says, but now thus says Yahweh, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. In the same way, if we are now bought for a price, thereby not being sole owner of our own lives, that would mean we have no right to extinguish our own lives. Now you've got some proof. You can't just go out and say, oh, you can't do it. It would imply and would simply equate to murder, as we're taking a life, and especially one which is owned by Elohim, even if the one you take is your own. Acts, the 20th chapter, the 8th verse. Acts, the 20th chapter, make that the 28th verse. Acts, the 20th chapter, the 28th verse, where it says, pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to take care for the church of Elohim, which he obtained with his own blood. 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, the 20th verse, where it says, for you were bought with a price, so glorify Elohim in your body. We've been there already. 1 Corinthians, the 7th chapter, the 23rd verse. We've heard it already, but just he keeps saying it. There's a reason for that. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. First Peter, the 1st chapter, the 18th verse. 1 Peter, the 1st chapter, the 18th verse, where it says, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Messiah, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. In other words, not only were you paid for, you were paid for with a rather handsome price, one that you certainly could not replace. Even winds up in Revelation, the 5th chapter, the 9th verse. Revelation, the 5th chapter, the 9th verse, where it says, and they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for Elohim from every tribe and language and people and nation. So he represents everyone. You even heard somebody one time, he might have died for somebody's sins, but not mine. Yours too.
That's right.
Now we understand. If you kill yourself, it's not automatic. That's what you heard for years, automatically. You kill yourself, that's it. You're gonna burn in hell. You're done. You're done. So to speak. No pun intended, just the way the words fell out. But what I'm saying is this. It's not automatic. You're going to get judgment just like anyone else. This study, however, would not be complete if we didn't go back and take a look at some of the people who overcame the deepest pits of despair in their walk of faith. Because sometimes that will make you feel like, I just don't want to be here. Their lives can be an example to the ones of us who may contemplate suicide and the ones who struggle in many ways in this life, possibly believing through these and other witnesses that they can persevere without giving up all hope, as some do. No matter what their troubles may be, there's a way out of it. We've all been through it, and we've all dealt with something. But even those of the Bible had to deal with something. Elijah, for instance. Elijah was much troubled by the sins of Israel in general, and the big thing that he had a problem with was he was being hotly pursued by Ahab, and more specifically Jezebel, who sought his life. And he finally reached that bottom point, that point where you just say, I can't take any more. He found it in 1 Kings, the 19th chapter, the 4th verse. 1 Kings, the 19th chapter, the 4th verse, where it says, but he himself went out a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now. Yahweh, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. In this, Elijah was comforted by Yahweh when he felt he could go no further, and he was hungry, and there were so many cases where there was nothing to eat, and a little raven brought him a little meat, and this gave him little things to say, hey, wow, I'm here with you. He didn't give him millions to say, oh, go off and do this, make it easy. You're going through a little something, so deal with it. Deal with what you're dealing with. Jonah was sent to Nineveh to prophesy to the Ninevites, but he had lived among the Ninevites. He knew what kind of people they were, and he didn't like them much. Matter of fact, God, why don't you just blow them away? These people aren't worth much. He says, no, I want you to go down there and He hated them because of their sins and wanted them to be lost. This sent him into a grievous depression. You found it in Jonah, the 4th chapter, the 3rd verse. Jonah, the 4th chapter, the 3rd verse. Therefore, now Yahweh, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. Translate, if these folk gonna live, I won't die. I've had enough. Obviously, he had to deal with these folk on a very personal level. That can kind of make you feel like, can't do this. You see, Jonah was so depressed that he was taught by Yahweh on why his perceptions needed to change. And you go back and read through that whole book, and you'll see that he taught him, hey, everyone needs a chance. Everyone deserves a chance. And they eventually did repent. Job was another. Lost everything. Lost everything. And you think that your significant other is going to look out for you and going to give you good advice. Go to Job, the 2nd chapter, the 9th verse. And you're already in a state of depression, and you're already not sure you want to live. And then you go to your wife for a good word, and verse 9. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse Elohim, curse Yahweh, and die. Job suffered on all fronts to the extent where he was being told by everybody, even his friends sat up, hey, it's your fault, man. You put yourself up on this thing. And imagine how that felt, though. Think about it. Everybody's coming at you. Your wife, your husband, your killed, your children are dead. Now all of a sudden, hey, man, your friends are sitting out there, and in the end, Yahweh has to come back and grab your friends by the throat, basically, and say, hey, this guy is okay. You all are the ones that need to sit down and shut up, because you're not giving good advice. You're not doing the right things. And before it was all over with, he wound up with everything that he lost. He didn't get his children back, but he had more and got back everything that he had. No matter what we go through down here, if we stay on the path, we're going to get it all back. We're going to get it all back. King David, at every turn, they were after him. At every turn. Don't get me wrong. Nobody's saying that he didn't deserve some of it. He brought it on himself. But the book says that he was a man after Yahweh's own heart. What does that mean? It basically means that if nothing else, he recognized when he sinned and repented of it. That was the thing that knit him with Yahweh's heart. He recognized after he did it, oops, I shouldn't have done that, and didn't do it anymore. Oh, he might have done something else, and then repented that, but then you all might look at it and say, I don't like that guy much. Psalms, the 116th chapter, the 3rd verse. But he was in a constant state of some kind of depression. Psalms, the 116th chapter, the 3rd verse. The snares of death encompassed me, he says. The pangs of Sheol, or the grave, laid hold on me. I suffered distress and anguish. If you notice, if you go through the Psalms, many of the Psalms were written by David, and they're speaking of the hardships that he went through, dealing with. Everybody think, oh, he was the king. He didn't have any problems. That's who has all the problems. Just in this sick age, the king just passes them on to us. Back then, you couldn't do that. Jeremiah went through much. To the point where what did he say in Jeremiah, the 20th chapter, the 14th verse? Jeremiah, the 20th chapter, the 14th verse, where he said, cursed be the day on which I was born. The day when my mother bore me, let it not be blessed. Why did I come out from the womb to see toil and sorrow and spend my days in shame? You see, Jeremiah saw the oncoming destruction coming upon Yahweh's people. And that's what put him in such deep sorrow. But he wasn't the only one. Matthew, the 26th chapter, the 38th verse. And somebody else felt the same way. Matthew, the 26th chapter, the 38th verse, where it says, "Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." You see, Yeshua went through his darkest trials, knowing that what he was going through, he was just going through. But you still have to look into that and see it. You still have to deal with that. The whips, the crown of thorns, the beating, days on end, hours on end. You still have to go through that. You're going to come out the other side. But at the first whip, you don't see that. That's not what you see. You see the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And you go through all of that. And he wasn't the only one. Peter, Mark, the 14th chapter, 72nd verse. Mark, the 14th chapter, the 72nd verse. "And immediately the rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered how Yeshua had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. Now after that, when that rooster crowed, what do you think he felt? Right at that moment. And he broke down and wept. Peter essentially did the same thing as Judas Iscariot. Betrayed his master. But one difference. And I think that this was shown to show something to us if we are wise enough to see it. He lived to repent of it. And will be, as a result, rewarded. Wait a minute. Will you see that? John, the 21st chapter, the 3rd verse. Let's just slowly go through this. John, the 21st chapter, the 3rd verse. This was some days after the resurrection, and things weren't going too well for him, and they just said, maybe we need to just disappear for a while and just cool out and figure out what to do. Simon Peter said to them, talking to the other apostles now, who were disciples, "I'm going out to fish." Amazing how no matter how hard things get, one place you decide, well, I can go relax. I'm going to go out. Let's go fish. Right, Sarah? Oh, never mind. "I'm going out to fish," they said to him. "We're coming with you." They went and entered into the boat at once, and in that night they caught nothing. And it now becoming early morning, Yeshua stood on the shore. Who? Wait a minute, isn't he dead? Not anymore. How did the song say? He's alive. However, the disciples didn't know that it was Yeshua. Then Yeshua also said to them, "Children, do you not have anything to eat?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net into the right side of the boat, and you'll find something." Then they cast, and they no longer had the strength to draw from the multitude of fish. The net was full. Then the disciple whom Yeshua loved said to Peter, "It is the Master." Then hearing that it is the Master, Simon Peter girded on his coat, for he was naked, and threw himself into the sea. Remember the first time he did that? And the other disciples came into the little boat, for they were not far from the land, only about 200 cubits, dragging the net of the fish. Then when they went out on the land, they saw a coal fire lying, and a fish lying on it, and bread. He was ready for him. Already there. Why should, hey, I've already got it for you, y'all. Yeah, I just told y'all to get the fish to give me a minute to do what I had to do. Verse 10. Yeshua said to them, bring from the little fish which you caught now. A little something to add to it. Simon Peter went up and dragged the net onto the land, full of big fish. 153 fish. Before that, all night they'd been out there and caught nothing. He comes up and all of a sudden now they've got 153 fish. Not enough to eat then and enough to go back and sell. And though being so many, the net was not torn. Yeshua said to them, come, break fast. Wow, that's where that came from, huh? That word, breakfast. Every night was considered a fast. You break up in the morning, that's breaking the fast. Of course, we had to change the word, breakfast. Break it down and you see what it is. You're breaking the fast. And no one of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? John had already told them. Knowing that it is the master. Then Yeshua came and took the bread and gave it to them, and in the same way the little fish. This now is 3 times that Yeshua was revealed to his disciples. He being raised from the dead, which had to lift a lot of their spirits. Wow, wait a minute, he was dead. Wow. What are we involved with? Imagine how you make all of a sudden, first you're like this. Now it's like, yeah. Except one. Except one. Verse 15. Then they broke fast. Yeshua said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, master, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. Again he said to him, secondly, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, yes, master, you know that I love you. He said to him, shepherd my sheep. Thirdly, he said to him, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved. You know what he's thinking about. That cock crowing. Peter was grieved that he said to him a third time, oh no, he's zeroing in on this. I'm about to get whooped. Something's got to happen here. He said to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, now you broke. Master, you perceive all things. You know that I love you. Yeshua said to him, he thought, oh, here it comes. This is it. But what did he say? Feed my sheep. Imagine how he felt at that point. Wow. That's all that means get back to work. That's just like, I'm done. I'm good. I'm good. Imagine how you feel. 1 minute you're probably ready to go out and ask if Judas got another rope. Now all of a sudden you're free to go back to work. And if you go back and look at what happened after that point with Peter, he was the first one there. Go back and read that account in Acts 2 at that first Pentecost where he was preaching to everybody. He was the one that caused 3,000 new people to come into this in a very depressed, repressive Roman Judea. Mind-blowing when you think about it. 2 Corinthians, the 1st chapter, the 8th verse. Paul went through it too. 2 Corinthians, the first chapter, the 8th verse. For we do not want you to be ignorant, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Paul felt that he couldn't go on with all the persecution that came his way, and just like Peter, Paul knew why. And if he was ever decided that now he died, well, what did I do? You held the coats while they stoned who? Stephen? So it's not like it you know, how they say, the world is after all round. But at the center of that round world is a Savior who is forgiving of all. This is an amazing thing we're dealing with here. It's an amazing thing we're dealing with here. The above examples show us how we can and must go through trials, go through tribulations. And we have to put our trust in Elohim. We have to somehow decide we can make it through and make it through to the end. And we need to know that there are no shortcuts. None. You see, suicide directs effectively, and it goes right to the heart. Not only to the one dying, but the ones who have to deal with that death. Suicide directly affects much more than the individual who walks down that dark path. This path is generally one that is fraught with fear. And we say it's a selfish decision. A decision that has far-reaching ramifications in the lives of any family and friends left behind by the deceased. While we do not here seek to judge a person who goes through with suicide, that's not our job. It's the job of Elohim to determine these things. Although we may be prepared to do so by the time of that first resurrection. And we may be judges on some of these folks, as we will be in others, for sure, by the time you get to that second resurrection. By then, we'll have had 1,000 years under our belts to figure out how to make this thing work. And also not only make it work, but make it work so that that person doesn't walk out of there feeling like Peter felt that night by the seaside. What is he going to do to me? What's going to happen to me? All the above, all that we went through before, everything we've gone through up to this point is not a judgment against the life that is lost. But hopefully it's an explanation for all of us who would go through dark times in our own lives and go through that point where you decide, I can't take it anymore. Yeah, like I said, if you've ever been there, you know what it's like. And you go back and look at that. And you decide within yourself, I'm not going to go through that again. Sometimes that's a long path, but you can get there. But the question boils down to whether that person who contemplates suicide believes his or her life belongs to Elohim, or whether he or she has just decided, I'm out of here. I can't take it. I've known a few. It's not an easy decision at any point and anywhere. But you have to give it into his care, not ours. You see, if you're not taking your own life, please know that. You're not taking your own life if you're a believer. You're taking a life which was paid for and bought by Elohim, being under his ownership. You see, in this way, it could be compared to murder, a murder which Elohim has specifically ruled against. But when you come to be judged, unlike us, he's going to look at what was your state of mind? What were you thinking of? What were you? What made you? What drew you to this point where you decided, I'm done. I can't do this. But we must know and understand, just as with any other life taken, all of the circumstances leading up to that point come into play and will be taken into account when that murder, which is what it was, is to be judged. If fear was a part of it, that'll be determined. If drug use or peer pressure or bullying, as they call it now, or was any part of it, all of this will be taken into consideration. Also, all who come up in the second resurrection will have a chance that they themselves surely didn't expect to get at the time of their suicide. They will be allowed to tell Messiah exactly why they felt that this was their only option. This will surely change their minds, those who felt that this was their only option. And at this point in their lives, surely they will clearly see that this is no longer the case. Once their mind is changed, they're never going to have that decision to make again. And if it is to be made again, they won't make the one they made the first time. Let us put our hopes in him, because the hope that is coming for those of us who might consider that are there for us now, if we think about it. But they will be there in a more profound way to those who have taken their lives and come up in that second resurrection. And we'll be there for them, as he will be there for them. Let us put our hopes in him and be encouraged that he will see the change in their hearts. And just as we who came up in the first resurrection know it, he will know to let them know that he will never let them go. God bless you all.